Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into 15 tangled stories of betrayal, manipulation, and the kind of revenge that suggests karma's been taking notes. And when a coworker accidentally blows open an affair someone thought was airtight, you know things are about to get good. We'll have something peaceful building in Minecraft in the background, because after all that chaos, a little calm doesn't hurt. Before we jump in, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who's been commenting and showing support lately. It's been incredible seeing both familiar faces and new names in the comments. You're the reason this channel keeps growing and improving every week. Sarah thought she had everything under control. Late nights explained away as team dinners, deleted texts, immediate showers the second she walked through the door. Her husband noticed the patterns but couldn't quite put the pieces together. That is, until one summer evening at a company barbecue changed everything. I noticed my wife Sarah coming home later and later from work. At first it was maybe 20-30 minutes past her usual time. Then it stretched to an hour, then two. Every time I'd ask about it, she had the same excuse ready. Team dinners with the marketing department, client meetings that ran long, last-minute presentations that needed finishing. She'd rattle off names of coworkers I'd never heard of, projects I couldn't verify, and I'd nod along like an idiot because what else was I supposed to do? Accuse her of lying without proof? But the pattern kept building. She'd walk through the door, barely make eye contact, and head straight for the shower. Every single time. No kiss hello, no hug, just a mumbled greeting and the sound of running water 5 seconds later. When I'd try to talk to her while she was getting ready for bed, she'd be glued to her phone, typing furiously, then deleting entire conversations before locking the screen. I caught glimpses a few times. The name Jake kept popping up. Jake from work. Jake who apparently had a lot of opinions about marketing campaigns at 9:30 at night. I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid one, the guy who checks his wife's phone or demands explanations for every late night. So I buried the feeling. Told myself I was overreacting. Sarah had always been ambitious. Maybe the job was just demanding right now. Maybe I was reading into things because I was bored or insecure or whatever other excuse I could manufacture to avoid the truth sitting right in front of me. Then came the company barbecue. Sarah's firm threw this big summer event every year. Families invited, open bar, the whole deal. I'd been to a few before. They were fine. Awkward small talk with people whose names I'd forget immediately. Mediocre burgers, someone's kid crying near the bounce house. This year felt different though. Sarah seemed tense the entire drive over. She kept checking her reflection in the visor mirror, adjusting her hair, reapplying lipstick. When we arrived, she made a point of introducing me to almost no one. We just kind of hovered near the drink table while she scanned the crowd like she was looking for someone, or avoiding someone. About an hour in, this woman approached me. She was maybe late 20s, blonde, carrying a plate of potato salad she clearly wasn't eating. She smiled, introduced herself as Michelle, and asked if I was Sarah's husband. I said yeah. She nodded, glanced around, then asked if we could talk privately for a second. My stomach dropped before I even knew why. We walked over to the edge of the parking lot, away from the crowd. Michelle didn't waste time. She asked me point blank if I knew about the Portland conference last month. I stared at her. Portland? Sarah didn't go to Portland last month. She went to Denver to visit her aunt who'd just had surgery. I'd driven her to the airport myself. Michelle's face shifted. She looked almost sorry for me. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a credit card statement. Her boyfriend Jake's credit card statement. There it was, a charge from a resort outside Portland. A couple's package, romantic getaway weekend, spa treatments, dinner reservations. The dates matched exactly when Sarah told me she was in Denver, taking care of her aunt. I felt like someone had punched a hole through my chest. Michelle explained that she'd been suspicious of Jake for a while. He'd been distant, secretive, always on his phone. She finally confronted him a few days ago, and he admitted he'd been seeing someone from work. He didn't say who at first, but Michelle pieced it together. She'd seen the texts, the hotel bookings, the late-night calls, and when she showed up to this barbecue and saw Sarah actively avoiding eye contact with both of them, it clicked. She said she wasn't trying to blow up my life, but she thought I deserved to know. She was planning to leave Jake. Figured I should have the same information she did. I thanked her. I don't even remember what I said exactly. My brain was static. I walked back to where Sarah was standing, talking to some guy from accounting, laughing like everything was normal. I didn't make a scene. I just told her we were leaving. Now. She looked confused, started to argue, but something in my face must have told her not to push it. We got in the car and drove home in complete silence. The second we walked through the door, I asked her about Portland. She froze, just completely stopped moving. Her face went white. I watched her try to calculate a response, try to figure out what I knew and what I didn't. So I helped her out. I told her about Michelle, about the credit card statement, about the resort booking and the romantic weekend, and the aunt in Denver who apparently didn't need as much help as Sarah claimed. That's when everything unraveled. She crumbled, just absolutely fell apart. Started crying, apologizing, saying it wasn't supposed to happen this way. She admitted the affair, 6 months. It started after some work happy hour where she and Jake stayed late talking. One thing led to another. The team dinners were hotel visits. The late nights were excuses to see him. The Portland trip was real. She'd lied about Denver entirely. Her aunt was fine. Sarah had spent a long weekend with Jake at a resort, pretending to be a couple, living some fantasy life while I sat at home thinking she was being a good niece. She tried the usual script. It didn't mean anything. She still loved me. It was a mistake. She wanted to work on us. But I was already done. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just told her to sleep in the guest room and that I'd be calling a lawyer in the morning. And I did. Filed for divorce the next day. My attorney was thrilled with how much documentation I had. Text records, the credit card evidence Michelle had shared, emails I'd quietly forwarded from Sarah's laptop while she was in the shower that night. Everything pointed to a clear pattern of infidelity and deception. Sarah tried to fight it at first, then realized she had no leverage. We settled fast, but I wasn't done yet. I sent all the evidence to HR at Sarah's company. Turns out they had a pretty strict fraternization policy, especially for employees who traveled together or handled client accounts as a team. Sarah and Jake had violated about 6 different clauses. The company launched an internal investigation. Within 2 weeks, both of them were placed on administrative leave. A month later, they were both let go. Not officially for the affair, of course. The termination letters cited policy violations and misuse of company resources, but everyone knew what it was really about. Jake's girlfriend Michelle left him the same week I filed for divorce. Last I heard, he moved back in with his parents and was working some dead-end sales job. Sarah ended up taking a position at a smaller firm for way less money and 0 upward mobility. Her reputation in the industry took a hit. People talk. Word gets around. The affair collapsed the second it was exposed. Turns out their whole relationship was built on secrecy and adrenaline. The moment it became public, the moment there were actual consequences, it just disintegrated. No grand romance, no happily ever after. Just 2 people who blew up their lives for something that couldn't survive daylight. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. You just have to give it a little push toward the curb. But workplace affairs weren't the only betrayal hiding in plain sight that week, because while I was discovering Sarah's secret life, someone else was about to stumble onto something far more calculating. Tyler and I started sharing our locations about a year ago. It wasn't some controlling thing, or a red flag I should have noticed. My car had broken down on the highway late at night, and I'd been stranded for hours waiting for a tow truck. Tyler wasn't answering his phone because he'd fallen asleep. After that whole mess, we both agreed it made sense to keep locations on. Safety thing, peace of mind. If one of us got stuck somewhere or something happened, we'd know where to find each other. For months, it was completely unremarkable. I'd glance at the app occasionally, see his dot at work or the gym or his apartment, and think nothing of it. He'd do the same when I was out with friends or working late. It was just there. Background noise in our relationship. Thursday night, Tyler texted me around 7, said he was stuck at the office finishing up a project. His boss needed something done before a Friday morning meeting, so he'd probably be there until 9 or 10. Standard stuff. He worked in software sales downtown, and late nights weren't unusual. I told him no worries, I'd see him tomorrow, and went back to watching TV on the couch. Around 8:30, I was halfway through some true crime documentary when I absently opened Find My Friends. I don't even know why. Boredom, maybe? Habit? I expected to see his little dot sitting at his office building downtown like he'd said, but it wasn't. His location showed him at a residential address in the suburbs, completely still, not moving, just sitting there at some house I'd never heard of on a street I didn't recognize. I stared at my phone, refreshed the app. Maybe it was glitching, but no, still there, same spot. My brain started doing that thing where it tries to rationalize everything. Maybe he was at a co-worker's house working on the project. Maybe his boss lived out there. Maybe it was a client meeting, except none of that made sense. He'd specifically said he was at the office. And if plans had changed, why not mention it? Curiosity turned into something heavier. I plugged the address into Google Maps, 20-minute drive from my apartment. I sat there for a solid 5 minutes trying to talk myself out of what I was about to do. This was crazy. I was being paranoid. There was obviously a reasonable explanation, but I grabbed my keys anyway. The whole drive over, I kept refreshing the app. His dot didn't move, just stayed there, motionless, at this house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and mailboxes shaped like little barns. I parked a few houses down and walked up slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Tyler's car was in the driveway. I stood there staring at it like maybe I was hallucinating. But no, that was his car. Same license plate, same dent in the back bumper from when he backed into a pole last winter. He was here, at this house, and he'd lied about where he was. I walked up to the front window. The curtains were partially open, and what I saw made my hands start shaking. Tyler was sitting on a couch inside. There was a woman next to him, dark hair, pretty, maybe late 20s, and on Tyler's lap was a toddler. A little kid, couldn't have been more than 2 years old, holding a picture book. Tyler was reading to him, doing the voices, making the kid giggle. The woman was leaning against his shoulder, smiling, looking at both of them like this was the most normal thing in the world. They looked like a family. I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled. This wasn't a work thing. This wasn't a client meeting. This was Tyler playing house with people I'd never seen before, people he'd never mentioned, in a life I didn't know existed. I don't remember deciding to knock on the door. I just did it. 3 loud knocks. I watched through the window as the woman's head turned. She said something to Tyler. He looked confused. Then he stood up, handed the toddler to the woman, and walked toward the door. The second he opened it and saw me standing there, his face went completely white. He didn't say anything, just stood there frozen. The woman called from inside, asking who it was. I stepped past Tyler into the house before he could stop me. The woman was standing now, holding the toddler on her hip, looking between me and Tyler with this confused expression. I asked her who she was. She said her name was Amanda. She looked at Tyler, asked him what was going on, who I was, and I watched Tyler's mouth open and close like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. So I told her myself. I said I was Tyler's girlfriend. We'd been together for 2 years. We were talking about moving in together, and I'd like to know what the hell I was looking at right now. Amanda's face changed. Confusion turned into something else. Horror, maybe. She looked at Tyler and asked him if that was true. He still wasn't talking, just standing there looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Then Amanda said something that made my stomach drop even further. She said Tyler wasn't my boyfriend. He was her husband. But that wasn't even the worst part. She told me they'd been married for 3 years. The toddler on her hip, that was their son. His name was Max. Tyler had been living with them in this house the entire time. This wasn't some affair or side relationship. This was his actual life, his real family. I felt like I was going to throw up. I looked at Tyler and asked him if it was true. He finally found his voice, started stammering about how he could explain, how it wasn't what it looked like, except it was exactly what it looked like. Amanda started crying. She put Max down and told him to go to his room. The kid tottered off, confused, clutching his picture book. Amanda turned on Tyler, asked him how long this had been going on, who else there was, if I was the only one. Tyler tried to calm her down, said we should all just take a breath and talk about this rationally, like there was a rational explanation for maintaining an entire secret fiancé while married with a kid. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. I asked Amanda how much she knew about Tyler's life, where he told her he was when he wasn't home. She said he traveled for work constantly, sales conferences, client meetings, overnight trips to close deals. He was gone 2 or 3 nights a week sometimes. She thought it was just his job, demanding but normal. Those nights he was staying at my apartment. The work trips were weekends with me. The sales conferences were vacations we'd taken together. I'd been dating a married man for 2 years and had no idea. He'd built an entire second life and somehow kept both of us completely in the dark. Things went from bad to unhinged. Amanda started going through Tyler's phone right there in the living room. She found everything: texts to me, photos of us together, hotel bookings, restaurant reservations, evidence of a whole relationship he'd hidden from her. She was screaming at him. I was still standing there in shock. Tyler was trying to defend himself, saying he never meant for it to get this far, that he loved both of us, that he didn't know how to choose, didn't know how to choose. Like we were menu items. I told him he didn't have to choose anymore. I was done. Amanda said the same thing, told him to get out of her house. He tried to argue, said they needed to think about Max, think about their family. She told him he should have thought about that before creating a second one. I left, walked out of that house, got in my car, and drove home on autopilot. I blocked Tyler's number, blocked him on everything. Amanda texted me later that night from Tyler's phone, apologized for what happened, said she had no idea. She was filing for divorce, and if I wanted to be part of the proceedings as evidence, she'd appreciate it. I said yes, sent her everything I had. Tyler tried to reach me through friends, through email, through a new phone number. I ignored all of it. Last I heard from Amanda, the divorce went through. She got full custody of Max. Tyler's living in some studio apartment, paying child support, seeing his kid every other weekend. His parents apparently disowned him when they found out. His friends stopped talking to him. The whole thing imploded. And honestly, he built that bomb himself. All I did was show up at the wrong address and watch it detonate. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Seriously, I need to know I'm not the only one spiraling at 2 a.m. over these stories. Alright, back to the wreckage, because what I discovered next made Tyler's double life look almost merciful. Tyler's deception was surgical and cold, but the next person's lies, they were wrapped in engagement rings and wedding plans that made everything hurt twice as much. Marcus had always been ambitious. That's one of the things I loved about him when we first started dating. He had this energy, this drive to build something from the ground up. When he told me he was launching a tech startup with 2 of his college buddies, I was excited for him, supportive, ready to be the understanding fiancé who knew that building a company meant sacrifices, and sacrifices there were. Marcus started coming home later and later. First it was 7 or 8 at night, then 9. Then he'd stumble through the door past 11, claiming he'd lost track of time in meetings or coding sessions or investor calls. He'd look exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, barely touching the dinner I'd saved for him. He'd mumble something about the grind, kiss me on the forehead, and collapse into bed. I got it. Startup life was brutal. Everyone knew that. So I picked up the slack. Wedding planning became entirely my responsibility. Venue visits, cake tastings, florals, seating charts, all of it. Marcus would nod along when I showed him options, but clearly wasn't present. His mind was always somewhere else, on his company, on the future he was building for us, or so I thought. Weekend shifts became the new normal too. Marcus would leave Saturday morning, say he had to put in FaceTime with the team, grind through product development, prep for Monday pitch meetings. I'd spend weekends alone scrolling through wedding Pinterest boards, texting my bridesmaids, feeling a little lonely, but telling myself it was temporary. Once the startup took off, once they secured funding, things would calm down. We'd get our life back, except something felt off. Marcus became weirdly cagey about work details. I'd ask how the product was coming along and he'd give vague answers. Say things were complicated, lots of moving parts, pivoting strategies. He stopped mentioning his co-founders by name, stopped talking about investors or timelines or anything concrete. When I suggested visiting his office to see where he spent all his time, he'd brush it off. Say the space was a mess, nothing to see yet, maybe after their next milestone. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to surprise him, packed up some sandwiches from his favorite deli, grabbed 2 coffees, and drove to the address he'd given me months ago for his office. It was in this converted warehouse building downtown, trendy area. Lots of startups and creative agencies. I parked out front, walked up to the entrance and pulled on the door. Locked. I peered through the glass. The lobby was dark, completely empty. No lights, no people, no signs of life. I checked the directory. The suite number Marcus had mentioned wasn't even listed. Confused, I walked around the building. Every entrance was locked. The parking lot was empty. This place was clearly closed, maybe even abandoned. My stomach started twisting. I sat in my car and pulled up Marcus's LinkedIn profile. I hadn't checked it in months. Why would I? But there it was. His employment status had changed 3 months ago. The startup wasn't listed anymore. Instead, it said he was exploring new opportunities, which is LinkedIn code for unemployed. 3 months. He'd been lying to me for 3 months. Panic set in. If Marcus wasn't working, where was he going every day? What was he doing during those 12-hour stretches when I thought he was grinding at the office? And more importantly, where was our money going? We had a joint account we'd been dumping savings into for the wedding. The fund was supposed to have close to $30,000 by now. I checked the account on my phone right there in the parking lot. $12,000 left, $18,000 gone. Withdrawal after withdrawal over the past few months. Grocery stores, gas stations, rent payments to an address I didn't recognize, Venmo transfers to people I'd never heard of. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I called a private investigator that afternoon. Found one online with good reviews and a flat weekly rate. I didn't even hesitate. Just gave them Marcus's details, his photo, his car description, and asked them to follow him for a week. Document everywhere he went. Everyone he saw. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The PI called me 5 days later. Said he had something I needed to see. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment. He slid a manila folder across the table. Told me to brace myself. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Time stamped, dated, GPS tagged. Marcus entering a luxury apartment building across town. Marcus leaving the same building in the morning, wearing the same clothes from the night before. Marcus walking into a grocery store with a woman I'd never seen. Dark hair, petite, pretty. She was holding his hand. In another photo, Marcus was at a park pushing 2 kids on swings, a boy and a girl, maybe 4 and 6 years old. The same woman was sitting on a bench watching them, smiling. There were photos of Marcus kissing her, photos of him carrying groceries into that apartment, photos of him picking the kids up from what looked like school or daycare. The PI had done some digging, pulled property records. The apartment was leased under the woman's name, Veronica Chen. A little more research showed she was Marcus's ex-girlfriend from college. They dated for 3 years before breaking up when he moved across the country for a job. That was 6 years ago, right before he met me. Apparently, Veronica had reappeared in Marcus's life about a year ago, reached out on social media, said she wanted to reconnect. She had 2 kids now, different father who wasn't in the picture. She was struggling. Marcus, being Marcus, wanted to help. Except help turned into something else. He started spending time with her, spending money on her, and eventually, he moved in. But here's where it gets absurd. He didn't break up with me, didn't call off the wedding. He just started living a double life. Mornings and evenings with Veronica and the kids, playing house, being the father figure they needed. Then coming home to me late at night, pretending he'd been working, draining our wedding fund to pay Veronica's rent, buy groceries for her kids, cover daycare costs. He'd been playing family man with his ex while keeping me on standby as the fiancé who'd fund the whole thing. The level of compartmentalization was honestly impressive in the most horrifying way possible. I sat with that folder for 2 days, didn't confront Marcus, didn't let on that I knew, just acted normal. Sweet. Excited about the wedding. Meanwhile, I was planning something else entirely. Our engagement party was scheduled for that weekend. 80 guests, both our families, all our friends, fancy venue, open bar. Marcus had actually shown up for planning this one because his parents were paying for it, and they wanted it done right. I spent those 2 days putting together a slideshow, used every photo the PI had given me, time-stamped them, added captions, laid out the whole timeline of Marcus's double life in a neat little presentation, hired an AV guy to run it during the party, told him I had a surprise video for my fiancé, something sweet and romantic. He didn't ask questions. The party started at 6. Everything was beautiful. Marcus was in a great mood, playing the role of doting fiancé, hugging guests, thanking people for coming. His parents were beaming. My mum kept crying happy tears. Everyone was toasting us, celebrating our love. Around 7, I asked for everyone's attention, said I wanted to share something special, a little tribute to Marcus and our journey together. Everyone gathered around. Marcus looked confused but smiled. The lights dimmed, the projector screen dropped, and then the slideshow started. First photo, Marcus entering Veronica's apartment. Caption, Tuesday, March 14th, 8:47 p.m. While I was choosing wedding napkins. Second photo, Marcus kissing Veronica in a parking lot. Caption, Thursday, March 23rd, 2:15 p.m. Told me he had an investor lunch. Third photo, Marcus pushing kids on swings. Caption, Saturday, April 1st, 10:30 a.m. Said he was working through the weekend. The room went silent. You could hear someone's champagne glass hit the floor. Marcus's face drained of color. His mom gasped. My dad stood up. People started murmuring. Phones came out. I let the whole slideshow play. 3 minutes of photographic evidence. His entire secret life on display. When it ended, the lights came back up. Everyone was staring at Marcus. He tried to say something, started stammering about how this wasn't what it looked like, how he could explain. I didn't give him the chance, just told everyone the wedding was off, thanked them for coming, and walked out. Left Marcus standing there in front of 80 people who now knew exactly who he was. His parents were mortified. His friends looked disgusted. My bridesmaids followed me out, wrapping me in hugs, telling me I was a legend. The fallout was nuclear. Marcus tried calling, texting, showing up at my apartment. I blocked him everywhere. His family reached out to apologize, said they had no idea, offered to cover costs for cancelled vendors. I accepted, figured they owed me that much. Veronica apparently found out about me that same weekend. Marcus had never told her he was engaged. She thought they were exclusive, working toward a future. When she saw the slideshow, someone at the party had recorded it, and it ended up online. She lost it. Kicked Marcus out, filed for a restraining order after he wouldn't stop trying to explain himself. Last I heard, Marcus was living with a buddy from college, working some mid-level sales job, trying to rebuild his reputation. Good luck with that. The internet doesn't forget, and neither do 80 wedding guests who watched a man's entire life implode in real time. Honestly, he handed me the matches. All I did was light them. Marcus wasn't the only one playing the long game with someone's trust. Sometimes the paranoia you're accused of having, it's the only thing that saves you. Emma had this way of making me feel crazy. Not in some obvious gaslighting kind of way, but subtle. Little comments here and there that added up over time. If I asked why she didn't text back for 3 hours, she'd sigh and say I was being obsessive. If I mentioned she'd cancelled plans last minute again, she'd tell me I was keeping score like some kind of relationship accountant. And if I ever brought up feeling like something was off, she'd suggest I talk to a therapist about my trust issues. For months I believed her. I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too needy, too insecure. To whatever label she wanted to slap on me that week to avoid an actual conversation. But something kept nagging at me. Little inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. Like her girls' nights every Thursday. Like clockwork. Every single week she'd tell me she was meeting her friend group for dinner and drinks. She'd leave around 6, come back around 11, and have almost nothing to say about how the evening went. No funny stories, no drama, no details, just vague mentions of wine and appetizers and someone named Jessica, who I'd never actually met. I asked once if I could join sometime, meet her friends. She looked at me like I'd suggested something insane, said it was her one night a week to decompress with the girls, and she needed that space. Fair enough, I guess, except her social media never showed any evidence of these nights. No tagged photos, no check-ins, no group selfies, nothing. When I mentioned that, she accused me of stalking her Instagram like a paranoid ex, said not everything needed to be posted online, which, sure, valid point, but also convenient. I started paying closer attention. Her location sharing was always off on Thursdays. Her phone was face down all night when she got home, and once I noticed she'd changed her clothes between leaving for girls' night and coming back. Different shirt, different jeans. She said she spilled wine and changed in her car. I didn't push it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I owned my apartment. bought it 2 years before Emma and I started dating. It was fully mine, which meant I had every legal right to install a security camera in my own entryway. I'd been thinking about getting one anyway after a neighbor got broken into, so I ordered a basic indoor camera, set it up near the door, and didn't mention it to Emma. I wasn't trying to catch her doing anything. I just wanted proof that I was wrong, that I was being paranoid like she kept saying, that I could look back at the footage, see nothing, and finally let this whole thing go. 2 weeks went by. Nothing. Emma came and went. I came and went. Normal couple stuff. I almost forgot the camera was there. Then I checked the footage from a random Wednesday afternoon. I was at work. Emma had the day off. The timestamp showed 2:15 p.m. The door opened. Emma walked in. That wasn't weird. She had a key. She stayed over most nights, but she wasn't alone. There was a guy with her, tall, dark hair, maybe early 30s. I'd never seen him before in my life. They walked in laughing about something. He had his hand on her lower back. She kicked off her shoes. He did the same. They walked toward my couch and sat down. Close, comfortable, like they'd done this before. I fast-forwarded. They stayed for 3 hours. 3 hours in my apartment while I was at work. When they finally left, he kissed her. Not a friend kiss. A full kiss goodbye at my door before they walked out together. My hands were shaking watching the playback. I checked the previous Thursday. Same thing. 2 p.m., same guy. 3 hours. I went back further. This had been happening for weeks. Every Thursday when she told me she had girls' night, she was bringing this man to my apartment in the middle of the day. And here's where it gets absurd. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted more information, so I kept watching. I screenshotted timestamps, I saved clips, I documented everything. The following Thursday, I told Emma I had to work late. She said no problem, she had girls' night anyway. I watched the footage live from my phone at the office. 2 p.m., right on schedule. Emma and mystery guy walked in. This time I could hear audio. She was telling him about her week, complaining about her job. He was making her laugh. They ordered food, ate on my couch, watched something on my TV. It was so casual, so domestic. Like this was their routine. I left work early, drove home, parked down the street and waited. Around 5 p.m. they both left. She kissed him goodbye again. He got in his car and drove off. She got in hers, waited 20 minutes, then drove to some restaurant across town where I assume she actually met her friends for the girls' night alibi. When she came home that night around 11, she asked how my day was. I said fine. She said girls' night was fun. I said that's great. We went to bed like nothing happened. The next morning, I confronted her. I pulled up the footage on my laptop, showed her the screenshots, the timestamps, the video of her and this guy in my apartment. I asked her calmly who he was and how long this had been going on. She lost it, started screaming about how I'd installed a camera without telling her, called me a psycho, said I'd violated her privacy. I pointed out she didn't live here. This was my apartment. She had no reasonable expectation of privacy in a space I owned, and also she'd been bringing another man into my home for months. So maybe privacy wasn't her biggest concern right now. That's when everything unraveled. She went quiet, sat down, and then, instead of apologizing or explaining, she tried to justify it. Said his name was Derek. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months. She met him at a work conference and they'd stayed in touch. She didn't think of it as cheating exactly. More like insurance. Insurance. She actually used that word. Said she cared about me but wasn't sure if we were going to work long term. So she wanted to keep Derek as a backup option. Someone she could fall back on if things with me didn't pan out. She thought she could maintain both relationships until she figured out what she really wanted. Figured she'd just keep us both around and decide later. The entitlement was genuinely staggering. I told her we were done. She tried to backtrack, said she'd end things with Derek, said she chose me. I told her that wasn't how this worked. You don't get to audition replacements while you're still in a relationship, and then act surprised when the person finds out and leaves. She started crying, begging me to reconsider, saying she made a mistake. I handed her a box I'd already packed with her stuff from my bathroom and bedroom, told her to take it and go. She refused to leave, said we needed to talk this through. I told her if she wasn't out in 10 minutes, I'd call the cops and report her for trespassing. She left. I texted her parents the next day, explained the situation briefly and professionally, said I had the rest of Emma's belongings and they could arrange a pickup time. Her mum called me, apologized profusely. Said she had no idea Emma was seeing someone else and that she'd raised her better than that. I said I appreciated it, but didn't need an apology. Just needed Emma's stuff out of my place. Her dad picked everything up 2 days later. Didn't say much, just loaded boxes into his truck and left. Emma tried reaching out a few times after that. Long texts about how she missed me and made a huge mistake. I blocked her number. Blocked her on everything. Last I heard through mutual friends, she and Derek didn't work out either. Apparently, he wasn't thrilled to find out he'd been the backup plan. She ended up moving back in with her parents for a while. No idea where she is now. Don't particularly care. The thing that still gets me is how she made me feel insane for months. Every time I questioned something, she flipped it back on me. Made me the villain for noticing, and she almost got away with it. If I hadn't trusted my gut and installed that camera, I'd probably still be there, thinking I was the problem while she ran her little insurance scam indefinitely. At least Emma had the guts to show her face when caught. The next person? They hid behind screens and strangers to deliver the killing blow. I was making dinner on a Tuesday night when my phone buzzed with a Facebook message request. I almost ignored it. Usually those are spam or someone trying to sell me leggings or essential oils. But I was waiting for water to boil and had nothing better to do, so I opened it. The message was from someone named Jessica R. No profile picture, no mutual friends, just a blank grey circle where a photo should be. The preview text said, "I think you need to see this." My stomach did a weird flip, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe someone had hacked an old acquaintance's account. Maybe it was a phishing thing. I clicked it anyway. What I saw made me forget about the pasta boiling over on the stove. Jessica had sent me screenshots, lots of them. My husband Dan's face was staring back at me from Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. 3 different dating apps, 3 active profiles, all with recent timestamps. His Tinder said he was online 2 hours ago. Bumble showed he'd been active that morning. The Hinge profile had messages from yesterday. My hands started shaking. His profile descriptions were almost identical across all 3 apps. Separated, looking for something real. No drama, no games. Just want to meet someone genuine and see where it goes. There were photos I recognized. Him at his buddy's wedding last year. Him on a hiking trip we'd taken together 6 months ago, except I'd been cropped out. Him in our kitchen wearing the shirt I'd bought him for his birthday. We weren't separated. We'd been married 4 years. We lived together, shared a bed, had dinner together most nights. I'd kissed him goodbye that morning before he left for work. There were no problems I knew about, no fights, no conversations about needing space or reconsidering things. Just normal married life, or so I thought. I scrolled down to Jessica's explanation. She'd written out a whole message, and I could tell she'd been debating whether to send it. She said she'd matched with Dan on Bumble a few weeks ago. They'd been texting. He seemed nice at first, funny, attentive, asked about her day, but the more they talked, the more his story seemed off. He mentioned being separated from his wife, said she was difficult, that they'd been done for over a year, but she was dragging out the paperwork. He called me his crazy ex-wife who wouldn't sign the papers. Jessica said something felt wrong about the whole thing, so she did what any reasonable person would do in the age of social media. She Googled him, found his Instagram, found my Instagram through his tagged photos, saw pictures of us together from 2 weeks ago at a friend's barbecue, realized he wasn't separated at all. He was just lying. To her, to me, to everyone. She said she felt disgusted that she'd been talking to a married man who was actively deceiving his wife, and she thought I deserved to know. She'd screenshotted everything, their conversations, his profiles, messages he'd sent to her and apparently several other women based on the Bumble activity log she'd captured. I read the whole thing twice. Then I downloaded every single screenshot and backed them up to 3 different places. Google Drive, my email. A USB drive I kept in my desk drawer. I wasn't taking any chances. Dan got home around 6:30. I heard his keys in the door, his usual greeting as he walked in. He asked what smelled good, completely oblivious. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone face down next to me. I didn't say anything at first, just watched him take off his jacket, set down his work bag, walk over to kiss the top of my head like he did every night. Then I asked him if he had anything he wanted to tell me. He looked confused, said no, why? Normal day at work, traffic wasn't bad. Did I want to watch that show we'd been binge watching after dinner? I turned my laptop screen toward him. The Tinder profile was pulled up, his face filling the screen, the description about being separated clearly visible. He froze mid-sentence. His whole body went rigid. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. He tried to deny it, stumbled over his words, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that someone must have made a fake profile using his photos, that this was clearly some kind of scam or prank. He kept talking, kept throwing out explanations, and I just sat there letting him dig. Then I pulled up the Bumble screenshots, the conversations with Jessica, messages where he described our marriage as over, where he talked about how difficult I was, where he made plans to meet her for drinks next weekend. That's when everything unraveled. He stopped trying to explain it away. His shoulders sagged. He sat down across from me and put his head in his hands, asked me where I got those. I told him a stranger on the internet had more respect for our marriage than he did, that Jessica had felt guilty talking to a married man and decided I should know the truth. Meanwhile, my husband had been living a double life and I'd had no idea. Dan tried a different approach, started apologizing, said it wasn't serious, that he'd just been feeling trapped and didn't know how to talk to me about it, that the profiles were a stupid mistake and he'd never actually met up with anyone. It was just texting, just a way to feel wanted. He promised he'd delete everything right now if I'd just give him another chance. I asked him how long. He hesitated. I asked again. How long had he been doing this? He admitted it had been over a year, maybe closer to a year and a half. He'd created the first profile after a fight we'd had about something stupid, something neither of us even remembered now. It started as a way to get attention. Then it became a habit. He'd swipe when he was bored, chat with matches during his lunch break. It made him feel desired, made him feel like he still had options. The entitlement was almost funny. I asked if he'd slept with any of them. He swore he hadn't, said he'd never taken it that far. But honestly, at that point, I didn't believe a word coming out of his mouth. The man had been catfishing his way through 3 dating apps while coming home and pretending to be a devoted husband. Why would I trust anything he said? But that wasn't even the worst part. I pulled up the rest of the screenshots Jessica had sent. Messages between Dan and other women. Conversations that went back months. Some were harmless flirting. Others were explicitly sexual. Plans that had been made and maybe kept, maybe not. I didn't know anymore. What I did know was that this wasn't some one-time mistake or moment of weakness. This was sustained, deliberate deception. He'd been planning an exit for over a year while pretending everything was fine, keeping me in the dark, letting me think we had a future. He kept trying to apologize, said he knew he'd screwed up, that he'd go to therapy, couples counseling, whatever I needed. He'd prove he could change, but I was already done. The second I saw those screenshots, something inside me just turned off. There was no coming back from this. No amount of apologizing or explaining could undo the fact that he'd been lying to my face every single day for over a year. I told him to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for the night. He tried to argue, said this was his house too, that we should talk this through like adults. I told him if he didn't leave voluntarily, I'd call the police and report that I felt unsafe. That shut him up pretty fast. He grabbed some clothes and his laptop and left. Didn't even look at me on his way out. I called a lawyer the next morning, filed for divorce by the end of the week. My attorney loved how much documentation I had. Screenshots, timestamps, conversation logs. Everything Jessica had sent me became evidence. Dan tried to fight it initially, but his lawyer must have told him he had no ground to stand on. We settled within 2 months. I sent Jessica a thank you message, told her I appreciated her honesty and that she'd saved me from wasting any more time on someone who didn't respect me. She said she was glad she'd reached out, that she hoped I found someone who actually deserved me. Dan's living in some apartment across town now. I heard through mutual friends that he's still on the dating apps, still swiping, still describing himself as separated and looking for something real. Except now it's actually true. And honestly, good luck to whatever poor woman matches with him next. She's going to need it. You'd think someone would learn from getting caught. But some people just double down on the same patterns and hope for a different result. The definition of insanity, right? Dan's dating profiles were amateur hour compared to what some people hide, because the next story involves a past so carefully buried, it took years before the mask finally cracked. Chris told me he grew up in foster care. No family, no siblings, just a series of group homes and temporary placements until he aged out of the system at 18. He said it matter-of-factly, like he'd made peace with it years ago, but I could see the pain underneath. It explained so much about him, why he never talked about his childhood, why he had no baby photos or family stories, why holidays made him uncomfortable and he'd rather stay home than deal with my relatives asking questions. I never pushed. What was I supposed to say? Sorry your entire childhood was trauma? It felt insensitive to pry, so I let him keep that part of himself closed off and focused on building a future together instead of dissecting a past he clearly wanted to leave behind. We'd been together 3 years when everything fell apart. I was at a coffee shop near our apartment, waiting for my latte, scrolling through my phone. This woman walked up to me, mid-30s, well-dressed, carrying an expensive purse. She smiled and said my name. Not like a question. She knew exactly who I was. I looked up, confused. I'd never seen her before in my life. She introduced herself as Lauren, said she was Chris's sister, and she wanted to know why he'd never mentioned me. I just stared at her. My brain couldn't process what she'd just said. Chris didn't have a sister. He didn't have anyone. He grew up in foster care. I started to tell her she had the wrong person, that she must be confused, but she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was Chris, maybe 10 years younger, standing with this woman and 2 other people at what looked like a family Christmas. Everyone was smiling, matching sweaters, the whole Norman Rockwell thing. My stomach dropped. Lauren sat down across from me without asking. She looked concerned now, asked me how long Chris and I had been together, if we were serious. I told her 3 years. We lived together. She nodded slowly like she was putting pieces together, and then she said something that made my entire world tilt sideways. Chris didn't grow up in foster care. He came from a wealthy family in Connecticut. 2 parents, 3 siblings, a trust fund he'd blown through by the time he was 25. They'd been estranged for about 4 years. She hadn't seen or spoken to him in all that time. She'd hired a private investigator to find him after their mom had a health scare and wanted to reach out. That's how she found me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I asked her why they were estranged, what happened, and here's where it gets absurd. Lauren explained that Chris had a gambling problem, a bad one. He'd racked up over $100,000 in debt, stolen money from their parents to cover losses, and when they cut him off financially, he spiraled, got involved with some dangerous people. Then there was an ex-girlfriend who'd filed a restraining order against him after he showed up at her work multiple times, sent her hundreds of texts, wouldn't accept that the relationship was over. The family tried to get him help, therapy, rehab, interventions. He refused, told them they were controlling and manipulative. Eventually, he just disappeared, changed his number, moved cities, cut everyone off. Lauren said they'd respected his decision to leave, but they never stopped worrying about him. When their mum got sick, she wanted to try one more time to reconnect. That's when Lauren found out about me. She asked if Chris had ever mentioned any of this, the family, the gambling, the restraining order. I shook my head. I told her the foster care story. She looked horrified, then sad. She said Chris had been lying to me for 3 years, that everything he'd told me about his past was fabricated to avoid explaining why he had no contact with his family and no photos or history he could share. He'd weaponized sympathy, made me feel bad for him so I'd never ask questions. I sat there in that coffee shop for another 20 minutes while Lauren showed me photos, family vacations, birthday parties, Chris as a teenager playing lacrosse, a whole life he'd erased and replaced with a fiction designed to make him seem like a victim instead of someone running from consequences. I thanked Lauren, gave her my number in case she wanted to reach out again. Then I drove home in a daze. Chris was on the couch watching TV when I walked in. He smiled, asked how my day was, completely oblivious. I stood in the doorway and asked him to tell me about his sister Lauren. His face went white. He didn't even try to deny it, just sat there frozen like a deer in headlights. I told him I knew everything. The family in Connecticut, the gambling addiction, the restraining order, the trust fund, all of it. He started to stammer some excuse, but I cut him off. I asked him why. Why lie about something so fundamental for 3 entire years? Then came the breaking point. He admitted it, said he knew if he told me the truth, I'd never have stayed with him. that the foster care story made him sympathetic, gave him a built-in excuse for not having family ties or old friends or any kind of verifiable past. He said he'd been planning to tell me eventually, but the longer it went on, the harder it became. So he just kept lying. The part that really gutted me was how calculated it was. He didn't lie on impulse. He'd constructed an entire false identity specifically to manipulate how I saw him. Every time I'd felt sorry for him, every time I'd gone easy on him because I thought he'd had a rough childhood, it was based on a story he'd invented to control the narrative. I told him to pack a bag and leave. He tried to argue, said we could work through this, go to therapy, but I was done. You don't recover from a lie that big, that foundational. I couldn't trust a single thing he'd ever told me. He left that night, stayed with a friend. A week later, we had a dinner party planned with mutual friends. I'd thought about cancelling, but then I realized I didn't want to hide what happened. Chris had built his entire life on secrets and manipulation. I was done protecting him. So when everyone asked where Chris was, I told them. I explained the whole thing, the fake foster care background, the real family he'd abandoned, the gambling problem and restraining order. I showed them the photos Lauren had sent me, watched their faces go from confused to horrified to angry. Most of our friends cut him off after that. They felt betrayed too. He'd lied to all of them in small ways, little fabrications that seemed harmless, until you realized they were part of a larger pattern. One friend said Chris had borrowed money from him months ago for a supposed emergency car repair. Now he was pretty sure that money went to covering a bet. Chris tried to do damage control, sent long apologetic texts to everyone, said I was exaggerating, that it wasn't as bad as I made it sound, but the evidence spoke for itself. People stopped responding to him, stopped inviting him to things. He moved out of our apartment the next week. I kept the lease. Last I heard from Lauren, she said Chris had reached out to their family asking for money. They offered to pay for rehab instead. He refused, cut them off again. Some people would rather burn their entire life down than admit they need help. Chris was one of them, and I'm just grateful I found out before I wasted any more years on someone who saw honesty as optional. Chris weaponized sympathy to hide his truth, but manipulation gets even darker when the person doing it convinces you that you're the problem. It started so subtly I didn't even notice it was happening. Alex would come home from work and ask about my day, and I'd vent about office drama or a difficult client, normal couple stuff. Except Alex would listen with this concerned expression and then gently suggest that maybe my job was taking a toll on my mental health, that my boss seemed unreasonable, that the stress wasn't worth it. At first I brushed it off. Every job has stress. But Alex kept bringing it up, kept pointing out how tired I looked, how anxious I seemed, how maybe I deserved better. After a few months of this, I started believing it. Maybe my job was toxic. Maybe I did deserve better. When Alex suggested I quit and take some time to figure out what I really wanted to do, it felt like care, like someone finally seeing how burnt out I was and offering me a way out. So I quit. Alex said they'd cover rent until I found something new. Said I should focus on my well-being first. Looking back, that was the first domino. Next came my friends. Alex never said outright that they didn't like them. It was more subtle than that. We'd make plans with my college friends, and Alex would be quiet the whole time, then on the drive home mention how negative they seemed, how they talked about me behind my back, how that one comment Sarah made was actually pretty cruel if you thought about it. I'd defend them at first, but Alex had this way of planting seeds, making me second-guess interactions I'd thought were harmless. One by one, I started declining invitations, started feeling awkward around people I'd known for years. Alex would suggest we stay in instead, just the two of us. Didn't I prefer that anyway? Wasn't it nicer to avoid all that drama and negativity? And honestly, it was easier, less exhausting than navigating social dynamics that suddenly felt complicated and fraught. Within 6 months, I'd stopped seeing most of my friends entirely. Then Alex turned attention to my family. My parents had always been involved in my life, maybe a little too involved sometimes, but they meant well. Alex reframed every phone call from my mom as controlling, every piece of advice from my dad as manipulation. They'd say things like, "I just want you to be happy, and it seems like your family only stresses you out," or "You're an adult. You don't owe them constant updates about your life." I started limiting contact, screening calls, making excuses not to visit for holidays. My parents noticed. They'd ask if everything was okay, if Alex was treating me well, and I'd get defensive because Alex had already primed me to see their concern as overreach, as them trying to control me. I actually got into a huge fight with my mum, where I told her to back off and respect my boundaries. She cried. I felt terrible but also righteous. Alex comforted me after, said I'd done the right thing, that setting boundaries was healthy. By the 1 year mark, I was completely isolated. No job, no friends I saw regularly, limited family contact, financially dependent on Alex for everything. And that's when the really insidious stuff started. Alex would tell me something, and then a week later deny ever saying it. I'd remember a conversation clearly, and Alex would look at me with this confused, concerned expression and say, "That's not what happened," that I was misremembering, that maybe I should talk to someone about my memory issues because this was becoming a pattern. I started doubting myself constantly, writing things down just to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. But even then, Alex had explanations. I was being paranoid. I was twisting their words. I was creating problems that didn't exist. The financial control was quieter, but just as damaging. Alex handled all our bills since I wasn't working. I had access to our joint account, but Alex would get upset if I spent money without asking first. Said we needed to budget carefully, that my impulse purchases were stressing them out. I started asking permission to buy groceries, to get coffee with the one friend I still occasionally saw. It felt normal because Alex framed it as us being a team, making financial decisions together. I was drowning and didn't even know it. Then came the breaking point. I got a DM on Instagram from someone named Rachel. The profile looked real enough. A few hundred followers, regular posts, nothing obviously suspicious. The message said she was Alex's ex and needed to talk to me. My first instinct was to show Alex. This was exactly the kind of thing they'd warned me about. People trying to cause problems in our relationship. But something made me hesitate. I messaged Rachel back, asked what this was about. She responded with a PDF attachment and a simple message. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last unless someone stops this." I opened the PDF. It was a timeline, a detailed documented pattern of behavior spanning 4 previous relationships before me. Names, dates, screenshots. Each relationship followed the same script. Alex would isolate the partner from their support systems, encourage them to quit their jobs or reduce their hours, create financial dependency, gaslight them during arguments, make them doubt their own perceptions and memories. Then, once the partner was completely vulnerable and dependent, Alex would either discard them for someone new or escalate to more overt abuse. Every single one of them had been left financially ruined, emotionally destroyed, questioning their own sanity. I read through the entire thing twice. My hands were shaking. I saw my own relationship reflected back at me in the experiences of 4 other people. The same phrases, the same tactics, the same slow, methodical isolation. Alex hadn't been caring for my mental health. Alex had been systematically dismantling my ability to leave. Rachel included her contact info at the end, said if I wanted to talk to the others, she could arrange it, that they'd all wished someone had warned them before it was too late. I spent the next week pretending everything was normal while secretly reaching out to Rachel and the other exes. We started a group chat, compared notes. They told me things Alex had done to them that I was already starting to see in my own relationship. The memory manipulation, the financial control, the isolation disguised as protection. One of them had been so broken down that she'd attempted suicide. Another had lost her entire friend group and hadn't spoken to her family in 3 years. Another was still in therapy trying to rebuild her sense of self. They'd all tried to warn the next person. But Alex was careful, always had explanations, always painted the exes as crazy or vindictive. By the time anyone realized what was happening, they were already too isolated and dependent to easily escape. But here's where it gets absurd. I wasn't alone anymore. I had 4 people who understood exactly what I was going through, who had evidence, who were ready to help. I started rebuilding my support network in secret, reached back out to old friends and apologized for disappearing. Most of them were just relieved to hear from me, said they'd been worried but didn't want to push. I reconnected with my parents, had a long, tearful conversation where I admitted I'd been wrong to cut them off. They didn't say I told you so, just said they loved me and wanted to help however they could. I opened a separate bank account Alex didn't know about. Started moving small amounts of money over every week. Not enough for Alex to notice, but enough to build an escape fund. I documented everything, saved screenshots of conversations, recorded arguments where Alex denied saying things I had in writing, built a case. Rachel and the others helped me coordinate. We compiled everything into a shared Google Doc, a comprehensive breakdown of Alex's pattern of behavior across 5 relationships, documented manipulation tactics, financial abuse, gaslighting, isolation. We included screenshots, bank statements, testimonies from multiple people. It was damning. Then we sent it to everyone who needed to see it. Mutual friends, Alex's employer, Alex's family. We didn't do it vindictively. We did it as a warning. This is who this person is. This is what they do. Protect yourselves. I moved out while Alex was at work. My parents and 2 friends helped me pack. I took only what was mine, left my key on the counter, and blocked Alex on everything. Filed for a restraining order that same day. The court granted it based on the documented pattern of psychological abuse and control. Alex tried to reach me through burner numbers, through mutual friends who hadn't read the document, through fake social media accounts. Every attempt just added to the evidence. The restraining order was extended. Their employer launched an internal investigation after receiving the document. Apparently, Alex had been manipulating co-workers too, creating hostile environments, playing people against each other. They were let go within a month. Alex's family cut contact, said they'd suspected something was wrong but never had proof. The document confirmed suspicions they'd held for years about Alex's past relationships. The mutual friends who bothered to read the full breakdown stopped speaking to Alex entirely. The ones who didn't, who thought we were all being dramatic or vindictive, learned the hard way when Alex tried the same tactics on them. It's been 2 years now. I'm in therapy working through the damage. I have my job back, my friends back, my family back. I still second-guess myself sometimes, still catch myself asking permission for things I don't need permission for. But I'm healing. Rachel and the others became genuine friends. We check in on each other, support each other through the recovery process. We've even managed to warn a couple of other people who started dating Alex. Most listened, a couple didn't. We tried. The thing about people like Alex is they don't stop. They just find new targets. But this time, there's a paper trail. A network of people watching, a documented pattern they can't talk their way out of. And if Alex tries this again, we'll be ready. Romantic manipulation destroys from within. But family betrayal? That cuts even deeper, especially when it comes from someone who's supposed to have your back. My younger sister Morgan had been competing with me since we were kids. It started small. She'd copy my outfits, try to befriend my friends, sign up for the same activities I did. Our parents thought it was cute, said she looked up to me. I thought it was annoying but mostly harmless. Then we got older and it escalated. She'd study whatever subjects I was good at, determined to get better grades. If I brought a boyfriend home for the holidays, she'd flirt with him relentlessly until he felt uncomfortable enough to leave early. When I got into a good college, she applied to the same one and threw a fit when she didn't get in. Every achievement I had, she needed to match or outdo. By the time I was in my late 20s, I'd learned to just keep my distance. I moved across the country for a job opportunity, put some geographical space between us, figured maybe without me around constantly, Morgan would finally focus on her own life instead of trying to compete with mine. That's not what happened. Instead, Morgan saw my absence as an opportunity. She started visiting our parents every single weekend, multiple times a week sometimes. She'd post constant photos on social media, family dinners, movie nights, helping mom in the garden, going to dad's softball games. All these little domestic moments captioned with things like family is everything, and so grateful for these times together. Which, fine. Good for her. She was being a present daughter. I was 3,000 miles away building a career. I called home once a week, flew back for holidays, sent gifts, stayed involved as much as I could from a distance. I thought everything was normal. Then the family narrative started shifting. Relatives would make comments during phone calls. My aunt mentioned how nice it was that Morgan was so devoted to family. Unlike some people. My grandmother asked why I never came to Sunday dinners anymore. Said she missed seeing me. I explained I lived across the country. She seemed confused, like she'd forgotten I'd moved. Morgan was feeding them a story, slowly, carefully. She'd drop little comments here and there, say I was too busy with work to visit, imply I'd turned into some corporate sellout who didn't care about family anymore. She never said it directly, just planted seeds and let everyone else draw their own conclusions. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until Dad got sick. He had a minor stroke, not life-threatening, but serious enough that he needed to be hospitalized for a few days and then rest at home for a few weeks. Mum called to tell me. I immediately looked at flights. Before I could book anything, Morgan called. She said Dad was fine but exhausted. The doctors wanted him to avoid stress and limit visitors. She said he'd specifically asked that I not come home right now, that he didn't want me worrying or disrupting my work schedule. He just needed rest and quiet and he'd call me when he was feeling better. It sounded reasonable. I was hurt, honestly, that Dad didn't want to see me. But if that's what he needed to recover, I'd respect it. So I sent flowers, called every other day to check in with Mom, waited for Dad to feel up to talking. Weeks went by. I kept calling. Morgan kept answering. She'd give me updates. Dad's doing better. Still tired. Not really up for long conversations. I'll tell him you called. She was so sweet about it. So concerned. Playing the devoted daughter taking care of everything. But that wasn't even the worst part. My Aunt Lisa called me out of the blue one afternoon. She sounded concerned. Asked why I hadn't come home to see Dad. Said the whole family was confused. I explained what Morgan had told me. That Dad didn't want visitors and needed rest. There was a long pause. Then my aunt said that wasn't true at all. She'd been visiting Dad regularly. He was up and around, doing physical therapy, sitting on the porch, asking about me constantly, wondering why I hadn't called or visited. He thought I didn't care. My stomach dropped. I booked a flight that night, didn't tell anyone I was coming, just showed up at my parents' house the next afternoon. Mom answered the door and looked shocked, then relieved, then confused. She hugged me tight and asked why I hadn't come sooner. Dad was in the living room watching TV. When he saw me, his face lit up. He stood, a little shaky but steady, and pulled me into a hug. Said he'd missed me so much. Asked why I'd stayed away so long when he'd been asking about me every single day. I told him what Morgan had said, that he didn't want visitors, that he'd asked me not to come. His expression changed, Mum's too. Dad said he'd never said anything like that. He'd been asking Morgan to call me, to make sure I knew he wanted to see me. She kept saying she'd pass along the message, but that I was swamped with work and couldn't get away. Then came the breaking point. Mum checked her phone, pulled up her recent calls. I had been calling, multiple times a week, but she barely had any missed calls or voicemails from me on her log. She showed Dad. They looked at each other with this horrible realization spreading across their faces. Morgan had been intercepting everything. When I called the house line, she'd answer and not pass the phone over. When I called Mom's cell, Morgan would see it first since she was always around and would decline the call or say Mum was busy. My text messages to Dad's phone, deleted before he saw them. The flowers I sent, Morgan told them they were from a neighbor. She'd constructed this entire narrative where I was the absent daughter who didn't care while she was the devoted one holding everything together. And my parents had started believing it because all the evidence supported her story. I felt sick. Dad looked devastated. Mum started crying. Morgan walked in around 5. She'd been out running errands, saw me sitting on the couch and froze. The color drained from her face. She started stammering about what a nice surprise this was, how she didn't know I was coming. Dad cut her off. He asked her directly if she'd been keeping me away, told her not to lie. Mum showed her the phone records we'd been going through for the past hour, all the deleted messages, the intercepted calls. Morgan tried to deny it at first, said it was a misunderstanding, that she'd been trying to protect Dad from stress, that I'd told her I was too busy to visit and she was just relaying information. I pulled out my own phone, showed them screenshots of my text to Morgan asking about Dad. Her responses saying he didn't want to be bothered. Emails I'd sent asking for updates that she'd replied to with vague reassurances and requests that I give them space. The evidence was overwhelming. Morgan's story fell apart in real time. She started crying, said she just wanted to be close to the family, that she felt like I'd abandoned them and she was trying to fill that gap, that she didn't mean for it to go this far. But it had gone that far. She'd deliberately isolated me from my own parents during a health crisis. She'd manipulated everyone into thinking I didn't care, and she'd done it all to make herself look better by comparison. Sunday dinner that week was brutal. Mom insisted Morgan tell the whole extended family what she'd done. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. Everyone was there. Morgan had to stand up and admit she'd been lying about me for months, that she'd kept me away from Dad on purpose, that she'd manipulated phone calls and messages to make me look bad. The room was silent. Then the question started. How could you do that? What's wrong with you? Do you understand how serious this is? Morgan just cried and apologized over and over, but the damage was done. She was ostracized. Family members stopped inviting her to things, stopped trusting her. My Aunt Lisa wouldn't even look at her. My grandmother, who'd always had a soft spot for Morgan, told her she was ashamed of her behavior. Morgan tried to rebuild those relationships over the following months. Some family members eventually forgave her, others didn't. My parents were civil but distant. They'd lost trust in her that wasn't coming back anytime soon. I stayed home for 2 weeks helping Dad with his recovery. Spent real time with my parents. Rebuilt what Morgan had tried to destroy. When I flew back to my life across the country, I made sure to set up regular video calls. Direct lines of communication that couldn't be intercepted. Morgan moved out of my parents' house a few months later. Got her own place. We don't really talk anymore. Last I heard, she was seeing a therapist and trying to work through whatever drove her to pull something that destructive. Honestly, I hope she figures it out. But that doesn't mean I'll ever trust her again. Morgan wanted my spot in the family, but some family secrets go back generations, hidden in places no one thought to look. I was helping clear out my grandmother's attic 3 weeks after her funeral. She'd lived in that house for 40 years and never threw anything away. My mom, my aunt and I spent the whole weekend sorting through decades of accumulated memories. Photo albums, old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations from the 70s. It was exhausting and emotional and necessary. Saturday afternoon, I was digging through a corner near the chimney when I found a shoebox tucked behind some old suitcases. It was taped shut, covered in dust. I almost tossed it in the donation pile without looking, but something made me open it. Inside were letters, maybe 30 or 40 of them, all addressed to my dad. The return address was from someone in San Francisco. The postmarks were from the mid-80s, right before my parents got married. I pulled one out and started reading. They were love letters, deeply personal, romantic, intimate letters from someone named Michael. He wrote about missing my dad, about their time together, about hoping they could make it work despite the distance, about how much he loved him. The language wasn't ambiguous. These weren't letters from a friend. These were letters from someone who was in a relationship with my father. I sat there on my grandmother's attic floor holding these letters, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. My dad had always presented as straight. He'd been married to my mum for 35 years. They had 3 kids together. I'd never once questioned his sexuality or his marriage. And now I was holding evidence of a whole part of his life I'd never known existed. I didn't tell my mum or my aunt. I took the box home, spent that night reading through every single letter. Michael talked about their plans to move in together, about coming out to their families, about building a life. And then the letters stopped. The last one was dated 6 months before my parents' wedding. Michael wrote that he understood my dad's decision, but that it broke his heart, that he'd always love him, that he hoped my dad would be happy. I couldn't sleep. My brain kept trying to reconcile the man I knew with the person in these letters. My dad was a good father, supportive, present, loving. He coached my soccer team, taught me to drive, walked me down the aisle at my wedding 2 years ago. But apparently he'd been living a lie the entire time. I called him the next day, asked if we could talk, just the 2 of us. He could hear something was wrong in my voice. We met at a park near his house. I brought the shoebox. When I handed it to him, his face crumbled. He didn't even open it, just held it and started crying. I'd never seen my dad cry before, not at his own mother's funeral, not ever. But he sat there on that park bench and completely fell apart. And here's where it gets absurd. He told me everything. He'd known he was gay since high school, but grew up in a deeply religious family where that wasn't an option. His parents, my grandparents, were devout Catholics who'd made their feelings about homosexuality very clear. So he hid it. Dated girls, acted straight, went to college and met Michael. They were together for 3 years. It was the happiest he'd ever been. But the pressure from his family was relentless. They wanted him to settle down, get married, have kids, carry on the family name. His father told him repeatedly that being gay was a sin, that he'd be disowned if he ever brought shame to the family. So my dad made a choice. He broke up with Michael, moved back home, started dating my mum. He said he did love her, just not the way she deserved to be loved, not romantically. But she was kind and patient and understood what he was going through. They built a partnership, had kids, created a life that looked normal from the outside. For 35 years, he'd been living a lie, pretending to be someone he wasn't, hiding this fundamental part of himself because he was too afraid of losing his family. I asked him if Mum knew. He said yes. She'd known for years. That hit me harder than anything else. I went home and called my mum immediately. She answered like nothing was wrong. I asked her point blank if she knew Dad was gay. There was a long pause. Then she said yes. She'd known before they got married. They had an arrangement. She came from a similar background, strict religious family, lots of pressure to marry young and have children. She loved my dad as a friend, as a partner. They'd agreed early on that their marriage would be a cover for both of them, a way to satisfy their families while living the lives they needed to live. She said it worked for them. They raised 3 kids, built a stable home, stayed committed to the partnership even if the romance was never real. She didn't regret it, but I regretted it. My siblings regretted it, because none of us knew. We grew up thinking our parents had this great love story, that they were happy, that their marriage was something to aspire to, and it was all performance. I told my brother and sister. They were devastated, not angry exactly, just as sad. Sad that our dad had spent his entire adult life in a closet. Sad that our mom had sacrificed her own chance at real love. Sad that our whole family was built on a foundation of hiding and pretending. Then came the breaking point. My brother confronted our parents at Sunday dinner, asked why they never told us the truth, why they let us believe a lie for decades. My dad tried to explain that it was complicated, that they did what they thought was best, that times were different back then. My brother said that wasn't good enough, that we deserved honesty. My sister agreed. The whole dinner devolved into this painful conversation where everyone was crying and nobody was angry, but everyone was hurt. My mum kept saying she didn't see it as a lie, that their marriage was real in the ways that mattered: partnership, commitment, family. She said love takes many forms, and theirs was valid even if it wasn't romantic. My dad said he wished things could have been different, that he wished he'd been braver, but he couldn't change the past. He could only try to move forward, except we couldn't just move forward. The revelation fractured everything. Family dinners became awkward. Holidays felt forced. My siblings and I didn't know how to relate to our parents anymore. It wasn't that we stopped loving them, we just didn't know who they actually were. My dad started going to therapy, talked about maybe exploring his identity now that his parents were gone, and he didn't have to hide anymore. My mum supported that, said she wanted him to be happy. But there was this underlying sadness to everything now, this sense of loss for the decades they'd both sacrificed. I found Michael on Facebook. He's married to a man in Seattle, has 2 adopted kids, looks happy. I almost reached out to tell him about the letters but decided against it. What would be the point? That chapter of my dad's life ended 40 years ago. The thing nobody tells you about family secrets is that even when they come from a place of survival and not malice, they still hurt. My dad didn't lie to hurt us. He lied to protect himself in a world that wouldn't accept who he was. My mom didn't deceive us. She made the best choice she could with the options she had. But we still lost something. The version of our family we thought we had. The story we told ourselves about who our parents were. And you can't get that back. You can't unknow what you know. We're all still in contact, still trying to navigate this new reality. But it's different now, quieter. Everyone's grieving in their own way for the family we thought we were. My dad's secret rewrote our family history. But the next story, it didn't just rewrite history. It erased identities entirely. I'd always looked different from my siblings. It wasn't something I obsessed over as a kid, but it was there, noticeable. My brother and sister both had my dad's dark hair and my mum's green eyes. They were tall, athletic, built like runners. I had light brown hair that turned almost blonde in summer, blue eyes, and a stockier build. When I asked about it growing up, my mum would wave it off, say genetics are weird, that I probably got recessive genes from some distant relative. Great Aunt Helen had light hair, Uncle Paul had blue eyes. See? All explained. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mum. She had no reason to lie about something like that. But there were other things, small things that didn't quite add up. My siblings had baby photos all over the house. First bath, first birthday, awkward toddler stages. My baby photos were sparse, a few pictures from when I was maybe 1 or 2, but nothing before that. When I asked why, my mum said the older photos got damaged in a basement flood. Lost forever. Tragic but believable. I also didn't have the same baby stories. My brother had this whole saga about being born 3 weeks early during a snowstorm. My sister came so fast, my parents almost didn't make it to the hospital. My birth? Mum said it was unremarkable. Routine, nothing special to tell. I was just there one day. I never thought much about any of it until I was 28. We were having a family dinner at my parents' house. One of those increasingly rare occasions where everyone's schedule aligned and we all sat down together. The conversation turned to money. My sister had just bought a house and was complaining about closing costs. My brother chimed in about his student loans. I mentioned that I was trying to save for a down payment, but it felt impossible with rent prices. My mum made some comment about how our generation didn't know the value of sacrifice, that she and dad had worked multiple jobs to give us everything we had. I pointed out, maybe a little too sharply, that they'd also had the benefit of buying their house when it cost a third of what it does now. She got defensive, started listing all the things they'd done for us, all the opportunities they'd provided, and then, in the middle of this escalating argument, she screamed something that made the entire room go silent. She said, "I sacrificed everything to raise you, even though you weren't mine." The words just hung there. My dad's fork clattered onto his plate. My siblings stared at her. I felt my chest tighten. I asked her what she meant. She realized immediately what she'd said. Her hand went to her mouth. She started shaking her head, saying she didn't mean it, that she was just upset and it came out wrong. But I wouldn't let it go. I demanded the truth, right there at the dinner table in front of everyone. My mum started crying. My dad looked like he wanted to disappear. My brother and sister just sat there frozen, as confused as I was. Finally, my dad told them to leave. Give us some privacy. They hesitated, but eventually grabbed their stuff and left. Then it was just the three of us. And here's where it gets absurd. My mum explained through sobs that I was adopted, not from an agency or foster care. From a family friend named Caroline who'd gotten pregnant at 19 and couldn't keep the baby. Caroline's parents were strict, religious, would have disowned her if they found out. My mum and Caroline's mum were close. They worked out an arrangement. Caroline would have the baby, and my parents would take me, raise me as their own. I was 3 days old when they brought me home from the hospital. My mum had faked a pregnancy, wore maternity clothes, told everyone she was due in late August. When I was born, they just presented me as theirs. No one questioned it. No one knew. Caroline signed away her rights. My birth certificate was altered to list my parents as my biological parents. Everything was buried. My dad sat there looking at the floor the whole time, didn't say a word. Just let my mum explain how they decided to hide this from me, how they thought it was better if I never knew, how they wanted me to feel like I belonged, like I was really theirs. I felt my entire identity collapse in real time. 28 years of my life built on a lie. I asked if my siblings knew. My mum said no. This was a secret just between her and my dad and Caroline's family. I asked if Caroline wanted to give me up or if she'd been pressured. My mum swore Caroline made the choice herself, that she was young and scared and thought I'd have a better life with them. I left that night without another word, didn't hug them goodbye, didn't say I needed time, just walked out, got in my car, and drove home in a fog. The next few weeks were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. I kept thinking about all the times I'd felt different, all the times something seemed off and I'd been told I was imagining it. Turns out my instincts were right all along. I found Caroline through social media. Wasn't hard. My mum had let her name slip during the confession. Caroline lived 2 states over, married with 3 kids. I sent her a message, told her who I was, asked if we could talk. She called me the same day. Caroline confirmed everything, said she'd thought about me every year on my birthday, wondered if I was happy, if my parents had told me the truth. She said she'd been 17 when she got pregnant, not 19 like my mum claimed, even younger, even more terrified. Her parents had given her two options, abortion or adoption. She couldn't go through with an abortion. My mum's offer seemed like a miracle, a way to know I'd be safe and loved without ruining her own life. She asked if I hated her. I told her I didn't know what I felt about her, about my parents, about anything. But that wasn't even the worst part. Caroline said she'd tried to reach out a few times over the years, sent letters to my parents asking for updates, photos, anything. They'd told her it was better if she stayed away. That contact would confuse me, make things harder. So she'd backed off, respected their wishes, and for nearly 3 decades, she'd lived with the grief of giving up her child and never knowing if it was the right choice. I started seeing her regularly after that, met her family, her kids, my half-siblings, who had no idea I existed until I walked into their lives. They were sweet, welcoming. Curious about this older sibling who'd appeared out of nowhere. Caroline and I are still figuring out what our relationship looks like. It's awkward, emotional, but there's something there, a connection neither of us expected. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents is in shambles. I can barely look at my mom without feeling betrayed. My dad still won't talk about it, just says they did what they thought was best, and he's sorry I'm hurt. My siblings are caught in the middle. They don't know how to support me without feeling like they're taking sides. I'm in therapy now, trying to untangle 28 years of lies and figure out who I actually am. Some days I'm angry, some days I'm just sad, and some days I feel nothing at all. Like I'm watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. Everything feels fake now. My childhood memories are tainted. Family photos make me nauseous. I look at my birth certificate and see a legal document built on fraud. I don't know who I'm supposed to be or where I'm supposed to belong. The worst part is my mum still doesn't fully understand what she did wrong. She keeps saying she gave me a good life, a stable home, opportunities Caroline couldn't provide. Like that somehow justifies erasing my entire origin story and letting me believe a fantasy for almost 3 decades. Maybe she's right. Maybe I did have a better life with them than I would have had with Caroline. But that wasn't her choice to make, and it definitely wasn't her right to hide from me forever. At least I had a story to uncover. The next person's entire foundation crumbled with a single test ordered out of curiosity. My brother Jake and I thought it would be funny. It was Christmas, we'd had a few drinks, and those Ancestry DNA kits were on sale. Our family had always joked about our heritage. Dad claimed we were part Irish, part Italian, maybe some German thrown in. Mum said her side was English and Scottish. Nobody really knew for sure. It was all family folklore and vague stories from grandparents who were long gone. So we ordered 2 kits, spit in the tubes, mailed them off. Forgot about it completely. 6 weeks later, I got an email saying my results were ready. I logged in expecting to see some pie chart of European ancestry, and maybe a distant cousin or two I'd never heard of. What I got instead made my hands go numb. The site showed Jake as a DNA match, but not as a full sibling. It listed him as a half-sibling. We shared only 25% DNA. I stared at that number like it would change if I blinked enough times. Full siblings are supposed to share 50%. That's basic biology. Something was very wrong. I called Jake immediately. He'd gotten the same results, same confusion, same sick feeling in his stomach. We spent an hour on the phone trying to rationalize it. Maybe the tests were wrong. Maybe there was a mix-up at the lab. Maybe this was some kind of glitch in their system. But we both knew. Deep down, we knew what this meant. One of us had a different father, or maybe both of us did. There was no other explanation for those numbers. We ordered 2 more kits that night, one for Mom, one for Dad. Told them it was a late Christmas gift, so we could all compare results and see the family tree together. They thought it was sweet. Mom even got excited about it. Said she'd always wanted to know her exact ancestry breakdown. I felt like I was going to throw up every day waiting for those results to come back. 4 weeks later, all the results were in. Jake and I logged into the accounts we'd set up for our parents. I took Dad's, Jake took Mum's. We compared them to our own on a video call, both of us silent as we clicked through the data. Mum matched both of us as expected. 50% shared DNA with me. 50% with Jake. She was definitely our biological mother. Dad matched neither of us as a parent. 0% parent-child relationship. The site listed him as an uncle or maybe a cousin, some distant relative, but not our father, the man who raised us, who taught us how to ride bikes and helped with homework and came to every single one of our soccer games and school plays, wasn't biologically related to us at all. We sat there on that video call not saying anything for what felt like hours. Finally, Jake asked what we were supposed to do with this information. I had no idea. We couldn't just ignore it, but telling Dad felt like detonating a bomb in the middle of our family. We decided to confront Mom first, drove to our parents' house on a Saturday afternoon when we knew Dad would be out playing golf, sat her down in the living room and showed her the results. I've never seen my mother's face do what it did in that moment. All the color drained out. Her hands started shaking. She knew exactly what we'd found and exactly what it meant. She didn't even try to deny it. After about 10 minutes of silence, she started talking. Said there had been an affair, a long time ago, before Jake was born, with a family friend named Ray. We'd known him as Uncle Ray growing up. He'd been around for holidays and barbecues until I was maybe 7 or 8. Then he moved to Australia for work and we lost touch. Apparently losing touch was intentional. Mum said the affair lasted about a year. She got pregnant with me during that time. Wasn't sure if I was Dad's or Ray's. She ended things with Ray, decided to make her marriage work, and never told anyone. When Jake was born 2 years later, she knew he was Ray's too based on timing. But by then, Ray was gone and Dad had no reason to suspect anything. She'd been carrying this secret for over 30 years. I asked her if Dad knew. She shook her head. Said she'd thought about telling him 1,000 times but could never find the right moment. Then years passed and it felt too late. She convinced herself it didn't matter, that Dad was our real father in every way that counted. Biology was just biology, except it wasn't just biology to us, or to Dad. Jake asked if Ray knew about us. Mum said yes. He'd known the whole time. She'd told him when she found out she was pregnant with me. He'd wanted her to leave Dad, start a family with him. She refused, said she loved Dad and wanted to make her marriage work. Ray was hurt, angry. When she got pregnant with Jake, he cut contact completely, moved across the world to get away from the situation. The man who was our biological father knew we existed and chose to have nothing to do with us our entire lives. Then came the breaking point. Jake and I had to tell Dad. There was no way around it. The DNA results existed. He'd eventually see them if he logged into the account we'd made for him. We couldn't let him find out that way. We told him the following week, sat him down the same way we'd sat Mum down, showed him the results, explained what Mum had confessed. I watched my father's entire world collapse in real time. He didn't yell, didn't get angry. He just sat there staring at the papers in his hands with this blank expression like his brain had shut down. Then he started crying. I'd never seen my dad cry before, not once in my entire life. He kept saying he didn't understand, that he'd raised us, changed our diapers, stayed up all night when we were sick, coached our little league teams. He was our father. How could he not be our father? I tried to tell him he was still our dad, that nothing changed how we felt about him, but everything had changed. We all knew it. Dad asked if we'd reached out to Ray. We hadn't yet, but we found him on Facebook that night, sent him a message explaining who we were and that we'd like to talk. He responded 2 days later, said he appreciated us reaching out, but he'd made peace with his decision decades ago. He had his own family now in Australia, a wife and 2 kids. He didn't want to disrupt their lives by introducing children from an affair that happened before they existed. He wished us well but asked that we not contact him again. Our biological father rejected us via Facebook message. The fallout was nuclear. Dad moved out within a month, filed for divorce after 35 years of marriage. Mum was devastated but couldn't exactly argue. She'd lied to him for 3 decades, let him raise children that weren't his while the real father lived on another continent, pretending we didn't exist. Jake stopped speaking to Mum entirely, blocked her number, refused to see her. He said he couldn't forgive her for lying about something so fundamental, for robbing us of the chance to know our real father and robbing Dad of the chance to have biological kids if that's what he'd wanted. I'm somewhere in between. I still talk to Mum occasionally, but it's strained. Every conversation feels loaded with resentment and hurt. I don't know how to be her son anymore when I'm constantly thinking about how she built our entire family on a lie. Dad and I talk every week. He's still my father, DNA test or not. But there's a sadness in him now that wasn't there before, like something essential broke and can't be fixed. He's dating someone new, says he's trying to move on, but I know he's grieving the family he thought he had. Jake found a therapist, said he needed help processing the fact that our entire childhood was based on a deception, that the man we called Uncle Ray was actually our father and knew it the whole time, that our real dad spent 35 years loving kids who weren't biologically his without knowing the truth. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel. Some days I'm angry at Mum for lying. Some days I'm angry at Ray for abandoning us. Some days I'm just sad that a stupid Christmas joke destroyed our family. Those DNA kits promised answers about where we came from. What they actually delivered was the end of everything we thought we knew. Genetic surprises are one thing, but when someone actively steals what's yours, hiding behind legalities and lies, that's when betrayal gets criminal. My grandfather was the kind of man who worked his entire life and saved every penny. He wasn't rich by any means, but he was careful, responsible. When he passed away at 87, he left behind a modest estate worth about $750,000. Not a fortune, but enough to change lives for his 5 grandchildren. He'd been clear in his will, everything split equally. 5 ways, no drama, no favorites. Derek was the oldest grandchild and the only one who'd gone to law school. He'd always been the golden child in the family. Ambitious, successful, drove a nice car, wore expensive suits. When Grandpa's will went into probate, Derek volunteered to handle everything, said it would save us all money on legal fees if we just let him manage the paperwork. He was family. He was a lawyer. Why wouldn't we trust him? So we did. The first few months, Derek kept us updated. Said probate was moving slowly, but everything was on track. There were some tax issues to sort out, some debts to settle, normal estate stuff. We nodded along. None of us knew how probate actually worked. We just trusted that Derek had it handled. 6 months turned into 9 months. 9 months turned into a year. Every time one of us asked for an update, Derek had a new excuse. The court was backlogged. There were complications with the property appraisal. Grandpa's accountant had misfiled something, and they were waiting on corrected documents. Always something, always just a few more weeks. My cousin Sarah started getting suspicious around the 1-year mark. She'd expected to use her inheritance as a down payment on a house. The delays were killing her plans. She asked Derek for specific documentation, copies of the probate filings, a breakdown of the estate assets. Derek got defensive, said she was questioning his competence, that if she didn't trust him, maybe she should hire her own lawyer and slow down the whole process for everyone. That response felt off. If everything was legitimate, why get angry about a simple request for paperwork? I decided to hire my own attorney. Didn't tell Derek, just quietly reached out to an estate lawyer in town and asked them to look into Grandpa's probate case. Paid the retainer out of pocket. Figured even if everything was fine, it was worth the peace of mind. My attorney called me 3 days later, asked if I could come to their office immediately. The tone in their voice made my stomach drop. I sat in their conference room while they laid out documents in front of me. Probate filings, bank statements, transfer records. My attorney walked me through it piece by piece, and with every page I felt sicker. Derek had forged documents, multiple documents. He'd created fake invoices showing debts Grandpa supposedly owed him. Legal services rendered over the past decade. Loans Derek had allegedly given Grandpa that were never repaid. Personal expenses Derek claimed he'd covered on Grandpa's behalf. All of it fabricated. All of it designed to justify redirecting estate funds into Derek's personal accounts before distribution. But that wasn't even the worst part. He'd also altered the distribution percentages in the probate filing. The will said 5 equal shares, 20% each, but the documents Derek filed with the court showed him receiving 60%, with the remaining 40% split among the rest of us. He'd changed the numbers and forged Grandpa's signature on a codicil that didn't exist. Derek had stolen nearly $600,000 from his own family. My attorney said this wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. We needed to file a police report immediately and notify the Bar Association. Derek could be disbarred, criminally charged. This was serious. I called Sarah first, then my other cousins, Jake and Melissa. We conference called our aunt, Grandpa's daughter. Everyone was in shock. Denial at first. Derek was family. He was successful. Why would he need to steal from us? But the documentation was undeniable. Bank transfers, forged signatures, fake invoices with dates that didn't match up to any actual events. It was all there. We hired a criminal attorney as a group, filed a police report, submitted everything to the State Bar Association. The investigation moved quickly once they saw the evidence. Derek had been sloppy, overconfident. He'd assumed none of us would bother to check his work. Within 2 weeks, Derek was suspended from practicing law pending the investigation. Within a month, he was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The evidence was overwhelming. His own digital footprint buried him, emails, document metadata showing when files were created and altered, bank records that contradicted his fake invoices. And here's where things went completely nuclear. I was angry, angrier than I'd ever been in my life. This wasn't just about money. Derek had exploited our grief, exploited our trust, used his position as the successful lawyer in the family to rob people who'd loved him, who'd celebrated his accomplishments, who'd trusted him with something sacred. So I made a Facebook post. I wrote out the entire story, attached copies of the key documents with sensitive info redacted, bank statements showing the transfers, forged signatures next to Grandpa's real signature for comparison, the fake codicil, the fabricated invoices. I laid it all out in excruciating detail. Then I tagged everyone, extended family, Derek's employer, his law school alumni group, mutual friends, anyone who knew him and thought he was this upstanding, successful attorney. I wanted everyone to know exactly who Derek was. The post went viral within our social circles. Hundreds of comments, shares. People were horrified. Derek's colleagues started distancing themselves immediately. His law firm issued a statement saying he'd been terminated. His law school alumni group removed him from their directory. Family members who'd looked up to Derek were sending me messages saying they couldn't believe it. Some were angry at me for airing family business publicly. Most were just devastated. Derek tried to respond, posted his own statement claiming I was lying, that this was a misunderstanding, that he'd made some clerical errors but hadn't stolen anything. But the court documents were public record at that point. Anyone could verify what I'd posted. His denials just made him look more guilty. Things went from bad to unhinged. Derek's wife left him. She'd apparently had no idea what he'd done, filed for divorce within weeks of the charges being announced. His friends stopped taking his calls. He went from being the golden child of the family to a pariah nobody would associate with. The criminal case took about 8 months to resolve. Derek's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor wasn't interested. The evidence was too clear, too egregious. It went to trial. Took less than a week for the jury to convict on all counts. Derek was sentenced to 6 years in prison, ordered to pay full restitution plus penalties. The court seized his assets, his house, his cars, his retirement accounts. Everything went toward paying back what he'd stolen. We recovered most of the money, not all of it. Derek had already spent some on his lifestyle, vacations, luxury purchases, gone. He was also formally disbarred, his law license revoked permanently, career over, reputation destroyed. The family fallout was almost as brutal as the legal consequences. Derek's parents, my aunt and uncle, were humiliated. They'd bragged about their lawyer son for years. Now they couldn't show their faces at family gatherings without people whispering. They stopped coming to events, stopped hosting holidays. My other cousins and I recovered our inheritance, but the money felt tainted. This was supposed to be Grandpa's legacy, his way of taking care of us. Instead, it became the thing that exposed how greedy and corrupt one of us really was. Family gatherings died after that. Too much tension, too much resentment. Some relatives thought I'd been too harsh posting everything publicly. Said I should have handled it privately. Let the courts deal with it quietly. But I don't regret it. Derek didn't just steal money. He violated trust in the most fundamental way possible. He deserved to have everyone know what he'd done. Last I heard, Derek got out on parole after 4 years. Lives in some small town a few states away. Works retail or something. His ex-wife remarried. His kids barely speak to him. He's effectively been erased from the family. Nobody mentions his name at gatherings on the rare occasion we still have them. The whole thing destroyed more than just Derek's life. It shattered our family. Grandpa would have been heartbroken to see what his estate caused. But that's on Derek. He made the choice to steal, to lie, to betray everyone who trusted him, and he got exactly what he deserved. Family greed is brutal, but workplace sabotage, that's where betrayal meets calculated destruction, especially when someone's career becomes the weapon. I'd been working as a senior analyst at a mid-sized tech firm for almost 4 years when my manager called me into her office on a Tuesday morning. She had HR with her. That's never a good sign. They told me to sit down. My stomach immediately dropped. They said there'd been a data breach. Client information had been leaked to an outside source. The evidence pointed to my workstation. Files had been accessed under my login credentials. Sensitive documents exported during hours I was supposedly working. They had timestamps, activity logs. Everything pointed directly at me. I was being suspended immediately pending a full investigation. They escorted me out of the building like I was some kind of criminal. I had to hand over my badge, my laptop, my phone. Security walked me to my car, 4 years of loyalty and solid work, and suddenly I was being treated like I'd committed corporate espionage. I spent that entire day in shock, replaying everything in my head. I hadn't accessed those files, I hadn't leaked anything, but someone had used my credentials to do it, and I had no idea how to prove my innocence. Then I started going through my calendar. Every meeting, every appointment, every moment of the past few weeks documented in obsessive detail, because that's just how I operated, and that's when I noticed something. The timestamps on the leaked files didn't match up with where I actually was. One of the breaches happened on a Thursday at 2:15 p.m. According to the logs, I was at my desk accessing confidential client data. Except I wasn't. I was in an off-site meeting with a vendor across town. I had the calendar invite, the confirmation email, and more importantly, I had badge swipes. Our office used electronic badges to track building access. When you left and when you returned, everything was logged. I pulled up my badge records. Thursday at 2:15, I was badged out of the building. I didn't return until 4:30. There was no physical way I could have accessed those files from my workstation because I wasn't even in the office. I found 3 more instances just like that. Dates and times when files were supposedly accessed from my computer while I was provably somewhere else. Meetings with timestamps, badge swipes that showed I'd left the building, even a couple of credit card transactions from a coffee shop downtown during one of the alleged breaches. I compiled everything into a folder and emailed my manager and HR. Demanded they pull full IT logs, not just the surface-level access records, but deep forensic data showing exactly what happened on my workstation. If someone had used my credentials, there had to be evidence of how they got them. IT took 3 days to run the full audit. When they called me back in, the tone had completely shifted. My manager looked uncomfortable, HR looked pissed, and the IT director looked vindicated, like he'd been waiting to catch something like this. They'd found it. Months earlier, someone had cloned my access credentials, installed a keylogger on my workstation during a software update I'd requested, captured my passwords, used them to create a duplicate login profile that could access files under my name without actually being me. And they knew exactly who did it. Brian. Brian was another senior analyst on my team. We'd started around the same time, worked on similar projects. I'd always thought we had a decent working relationship. Friendly, but professional. Apparently I was wrong, but that wasn't even the worst part. Once IT started digging into Brian's activity, they found something bigger. He hadn't just framed me for a data leak. He'd actually leaked the data, and he wasn't working alone. Brian had been in contact with one of our competitors for almost 6 months. He'd been systematically gathering client information, project details, proprietary strategies, everything he could get his hands on. He was planning to jump ship and take half our team with him. Not just leave for a new job, but orchestrate a full exodus, poach our clients, steal our projects, gut the department. He needed a scapegoat to cover his tracks while he set everything up. So he chose me, cloned my credentials, made it look like I was the one leaking information, Figured by the time anyone figured it out, he'd be long gone and I'd be taking the fall. The plan was almost elegant in how calculated it was. If I got fired for the data breach, the investigation would stop. Brian could continue his preparations without scrutiny. By the time the company realized the leaks were still happening, he'd have already left with his team and a portfolio of stolen clients. Except he didn't account for me being meticulous about documentation. Didn't think I'd have timestamps and badge swipes and credit card receipts proving I couldn't have done what he'd framed me for. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The executives didn't just fire Brian, they launched a full internal investigation into everyone he'd been communicating with. Pulled email records, reviewed chat logs, checked personal devices that had been connected to the company network. They found 3 other employees involved, 2 other senior analysts and a project manager. All of them had been coordinating with Brian, planning the move to the competitor, dividing up which clients they'd each approach. They had a whole spreadsheet mapping out their strategy. The company fired all 4 of them immediately. No severance, no references, escorted out by security the same way they'd done to me. Then the legal department got involved, sued them for breach of contract, theft of proprietary information, and about 6 other things I didn't fully understand. The competitor got hit with a lawsuit too for corporate espionage and poaching. I got called back into my manager's office a week later. Same HR person, very different energy. They apologized profusely, said they should have dug deeper from the start instead of immediately suspending me, offered me my job back with a promotion and a raise, wanted to make it right. I took the promotion, made them put the raise in writing, and insisted on a formal letter clearing my name that would go in my permanent file. They agreed to everything. Brian tried reaching out a few months later, sent me a LinkedIn message asking if we could talk, said he wanted to explain. I blocked him without responding. There was nothing he could say that would justify trying to destroy my career to cover his own schemes. The legal cases dragged on for over a year. I had to give depositions, provide evidence. The whole thing was exhausting. But eventually the company won. Brian and the others had to pay damages. The competitor settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, and I got to keep my job and my reputation intact. The thing that still bothers me is how close it came to working. If I hadn't been so obsessive about my calendar, if I hadn't thought to check my badge records, I'd probably still be fighting to clear my name. Brian would have gotten away with it. And I'd have been the one left holding the bag while he built his career on stolen work. People always say trust your instincts, but sometimes your instincts aren't enough. You need documentation, evidence, a paper trail that proves what really happened when someone tries to rewrite history at your expense. Brian tried using me as a scapegoat, but some bosses don't need middlemen. They'll destroy you directly if it benefits their climb. Richard became my boss 3 years ago when our department restructured. He seemed fine at first, professional, competent enough, but within a few months a pattern emerged that made my professional life a living nightmare. Every project I completed somehow became his achievement. I'd spend weeks developing a client proposal, researching competitors, building presentations from scratch. Then Richard would present it in the executive meeting with barely a mention of my involvement. When people praised the work, he'd smile and accept the compliment. Maybe toss out a vague, "My team did great," without naming anyone specifically. The first few times I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he forgot to mention me. Maybe that's just how management worked. Credit flows upward. But it kept happening, and it got worse. Richard started undermining me directly in meetings. I'd present an idea, and he'd immediately poke holes in it, say it needed more development, suggest we table it for now. Then 2 weeks later, he'd present the exact same concept as his own brilliant strategy. When I pointed this out once, he looked at me like I was being difficult and said, "Great minds think alike." The professional gaslighting was almost impressive in its consistency. I applied for a promotion, senior analyst position. I was more than qualified, had the metrics to prove it. 3 years of solid performance reviews, projects that had directly increased revenue. My interview went well, then I didn't get it. HR said the decision was close, but they went with someone who had more leadership experience. I found out later that Richard had told the hiring committee I wasn't ready, that I needed more time developing my skills before taking on additional responsibility. He blocked me, deliberately, and I had no recourse because it was his assessment as my direct supervisor. I tried talking to him about it, asked what I needed to improve, what skills I was lacking. He gave me vague feedback about needing to be more assertive and take more initiative, which was rich coming from the man who'd been stealing my initiatives for years and presenting them as his own. 6 months later, another promotion opportunity came up. I applied again. This time I was even more prepared, had everything documented, my contributions clearly outlined, references from colleagues in other departments who'd worked with me directly. Didn't get it. Richard had blocked me again, told the committee I wasn't a team player, that I had trouble collaborating. Meanwhile, I'd been carrying half his workload while he took credit and attended networking lunches. That's when I started documenting everything. I lived in a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record conversations as long as I was part of them. So I started recording every meeting with Richard, every one-on-one, every project discussion. I kept meticulous notes with timestamps, saved every email, backed up project files with metadata showing who created them and when. I reached out quietly to other colleagues, asked if they'd experienced similar issues with Richard. Turns out I wasn't alone. 4 other people in our department had nearly identical stories. Projects stolen, credit taken, promotions blocked. One woman said Richard had made inappropriate comments about her appearance and then denied it when she reported him to HR. We started comparing notes, building a case. None of us wanted to be the first to speak up alone, but together we had something substantial. Then Richard got nominated for VP. The announcement came via company-wide email. Richard was being considered for vice president of our division. It would be a huge promotion, more money, more power, more people for him to steamroll on his way up the corporate ladder. I spent the next 2 weeks putting together a dossier, 40 pages, every instance of misconduct I could document, emails where Richard explicitly took credit for my work, recorded meetings where he undermined me and others, time-stamped project files proving I'd created presentations he later claimed as his own, testimony from 4 colleagues detailing similar patterns of behavior, evidence of the inappropriate comments made to my female coworker. I submitted it directly to the executive board with copies to HR and our company's ethics hotline. And here's where it gets absurd. The board launched an investigation, a real one. They interviewed everyone I'd named, reviewed the documentation, pulled email records, listened to the recordings. Within a week, Richard was put on administrative leave pending the outcome. He tried calling me, left angry voicemails accusing me of sabotaging him, said I was bitter about not getting promoted and this was revenge. I forwarded the voicemails to HR as evidence of retaliation. They added it to the file. The investigation took 2 weeks total. Turns out when you have 40 pages of documented evidence and multiple corroborating witnesses, things move pretty quickly. The board found that Richard had systematically taken credit for subordinates' work, created a hostile work environment, and violated several company policies around employee development and fair promotion practices. His VP nomination was revoked. He was demoted to a lateral role in a completely different department, stripped of his management responsibilities, no direct reports, basically a glorified project coordinator. Then came the breaking point. I was promoted to his former position, manager of our department, the job I'd been qualified for 3 years ago, the role he'd actively prevented me from getting. HR made the announcement the same day they finalized Richard's demotion. The irony was not lost on anyone. Richard completely spiraled. He filed a complaint with HR claiming the investigation was biased, that I'd manipulated evidence, that the recordings were taken out of context. HR reviewed his complaint and found it baseless. Everything I'd submitted was legitimate. Multiple witnesses backed up the claims. There was no conspiracy, just consequences. He tried going over HR's head to the executive board. They told him the matter was closed and further retaliation would result in termination. He tried rallying colleagues to his defense. Most people avoided him. The ones who'd worked under him were relieved he was gone. I started my new role and immediately began changing the department culture, implemented transparent project attribution, created a system where everyone got credit for their contributions, started advocating for my team's promotions instead of blocking them. Morale improved almost immediately. Richard lasted 3 months in his new position before quitting, sent a terse resignation email citing a toxic work environment and unfair treatment. Nobody bought it. Everyone knew he'd been demoted for cause and couldn't handle the loss of status. Last I heard, He was working at a much smaller company in a mid-level position. His reputation in our industry took a massive hit. Word travels fast in professional circles, and multiple people from our company made sure the story got around. Not out of spite, just honesty. When someone asks what happened to Richard, people tell the truth. I don't feel guilty about it. I gave Richard multiple chances to treat people fairly, to share credit, to support his team instead of exploiting them. He chose the path he took. I just made sure there was accountability. Some people call it career suicide to go after your boss like that. But Richard had already killed my career trajectory twice. All I did was defend myself with documentation and truth. If that destroyed his promotion, that's on him. You can't build a career on stolen work and expect it to last forever. The corporate world protects people like Richard until someone forces them to look at the evidence. Then suddenly all those whispered complaints and ignored red flags become a pattern they can't deny. I just made the pattern impossible to ignore. Richard fell hard, but when entire systems protect the corrupt, burning one person isn't enough. You have to expose the rot at every level. I reported sexual harassment by a director to HR on a Tuesday afternoon in March. His name was Kenneth. He'd been with the company for 12 years, well liked by upper management, one of those guys who seemed untouchable. He had a habit of cornering women in empty conference rooms, making comments about their clothes, touching their shoulders or lower backs during conversations. It was constant and calculated. I put up with it for 6 months before I finally hit my breaking point. He'd made a comment about my body in front of 3 other employees. Something crude disguised as a joke. Everyone laughed uncomfortably. I smiled and excused myself, then went straight to HR. The HR manager, Patricia, listened with this concerned expression that I now realize was completely performative. She took notes, nodded in all the right places, said she took these matters very seriously, that they'd launch an investigation immediately, that I was brave for coming forward, and they'd protect me from any retaliation. I left that meeting feeling relieved, like I'd finally done something, like the company would handle it and Kenneth would face consequences. Weeks passed, nothing happened. Kenneth was still around, still making comments, still cornering women. I followed up with Patricia. She said the investigation was ongoing and these things take time. To be patient, that she'd update me as soon as there was progress. 2 months went by, still nothing. I sent another email. Patricia responded saying they'd concluded the investigation and found insufficient evidence to support my claims. She suggested we schedule a meeting to discuss next steps. The meeting was worse than I expected. Patricia sat across from me with this tight smile and explained that while they appreciated me bringing my concerns forward, they had to be careful about making serious accusations without concrete proof, that Kenneth denied everything, that the other employees present during the incident I'd mentioned said they didn't remember it the way I described, that I needed to be mindful of the potential consequences of damaging someone's reputation based on misunderstandings. She was threatening me, politely, professionally, but it was a threat. I asked what about the other complaints. I knew I wasn't the first woman to report Kenneth. I'd heard whispers, seen the way certain women avoided being alone with him. Patricia looked confused, said she wasn't aware of other complaints, that mine was the first formal report they'd received about Kenneth. I knew that was a lie. I left that meeting furious and humiliated. They weren't going to do anything. Kenneth was protected, and I was being warned to keep my mouth shut or face consequences. But that wasn't even the worst part. I started reaching out quietly to other women in the company, current employees, and people who'd left in the past year or two. I created an anonymous survey, nothing identifying, just a safe space for people to share their experiences with workplace harassment and how HR had handled their complaints. I sent the survey link to over 50 women. 32 responded within a week. The stories were horrifying. Woman after woman described being harassed by Kenneth. Some had reported it to HR. Some hadn't because they'd heard nothing ever came of complaints. The ones who did report it all got the same treatment I did. Promises of investigation, months of silence, then dismissal due to insufficient evidence. Some were warned about making false accusations. One woman was moved to a different department after complaining. Another was let go 3 months after reporting Kenneth for supposed performance issues that had never been mentioned before. HR hadn't just failed to act. They'd actively covered for him, protected him, retaliated against women who spoke up. I compiled everything into a document, anonymized the responses to protect identities, but kept the patterns clear. Harassment spanning years, multiple complaints buried, a systemic failure of HR to do their job. I reached out to an employment lawyer to make sure I had my bases covered. She reviewed everything and said I had more than enough to blow this wide open. I sent the report to the CEO, the board of directors, and 3 local media outlets that had covered workplace harassment stories before. And here's where it gets absurd. The CEO's office called me 2 days later, wanted to meet. I brought my lawyer. They tried to do damage control, said they were shocked, that they had no idea HR had mishandled complaints this way, that they'd take immediate action. They asked me not to go public, offered me a settlement if I'd sign an NDA and agree to keep everything quiet. I told them the media already had the story. It was too late for hush money. The article went live that Friday. Front page of the local business section. 32 anonymous accounts of harassment. Years of complaints ignored by HR. A director who'd been protected despite multiple credible allegations. The company's pattern of retaliation against women who spoke up. It went viral by Monday. National outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Former employees started coming forward publicly with their own stories. The company's stock took a hit. Customers started pulling contracts. Kenneth was fired within a week, escorted out of the building by security. HR Director Patricia and 2 other senior HR staff were let go. The company issued a public apology and promised a complete overhaul of their harassment policies and reporting procedures. Then came the breaking point. A law firm reached out about organizing a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the women who'd been harassed and retaliated against. 32 survey respondents became 60 former and current employees willing to participate. The case was airtight. Years of documented complaints, clear patterns of institutional failure, evidence of retaliation. The company settled 10 months later for $4.7 million, divided among all the plaintiffs. I got a portion for my role in bringing everything to light and for the retaliation I'd faced after reporting Kenneth. I left the company before the settlement was finalized. They offered me a promotion and a raise to stay, tried to frame it as a fresh start under new leadership. I declined, took my settlement, got recommendation letters from the new CEO, acknowledging my courage in exposing the corruption, and moved on. The entire HR department was gutted and replaced. The company brought in external consultants to rebuild their reporting systems from the ground up. Mandatory harassment training became quarterly instead of annual. They established an anonymous hotline managed by a third party, so HR couldn't bury complaints anymore. None of it would have happened if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd accepted Patricia's warning and moved on. If I'd believed them when they said there was insufficient evidence. Kenneth, last I heard, is working at some small firm in another state, probably doing the same thing to a new group of women who don't know his history. Patricia disappeared from LinkedIn entirely, either changed careers or is hiding under a rock somewhere. The women who participated in the lawsuit are doing okay. Some stayed with the company under the new policies. Others left and found better opportunities. We have a group chat where we check in occasionally, celebrate wins, support each other through the ongoing therapy and healing. People ask if I regret blowing everything up, if it was worth the stress and the backlash and the months of legal battles. The answer is yes, every single time, because some things are bigger than one person's comfort or career. Some fights are worth having even when the odds are stacked against you, and sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to burn it down and build something better from the ashes. I'd do it again in a heartbeat, and there you have it, 15 stories of betrayal, exposure, and the messy aftermath of shattered trust. From hidden affairs to stolen inheritances, these Redditors reminded us that sometimes the people closest to us are hiding the most. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, trust your gut, document everything, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed Google search. If tonight's chaos kept you awake, don't worry. There's always more drama waiting in the next video. Until then, sleep tight and maybe check your partner's location one more time. You know, just in case.